Members of the jury, look around you. We stand within these hallowed walls, under the heavy timber of a ceiling that has witnessed a century of truth. This is a sacred space. Here, the scales of justice are not merely symbols etched in stone. They are the living, breathing instruments we use to weigh the darkest reaches of the human soul against the unyielding light of morality. Imagine, if you will, a world where justice is a ghost, a whispered concept lost in the pages of dusty law books. But in this nation, built upon the pillars of liberty and righteousness, we refuse to let justice be a phantom. We gather here not to sensationalize horror, though horror has visited us. We gather here not to revel in the macabre, though the details I will present are enough to chill the blood in your veins. We gather to confront the shadow head-on. We are here for Shad Therian. We are here to ensure that the innocent are protected, that the guilty are held to account, and that the moral fabric of our society, that delicate tapestry we all weave together, remains intact. Morality demands that we do not turn away from atrocity. Justice requires that we examine it with an unflinching resolve, even when our every instinct tells us to close our eyes. Today, I present to you a case that tests the very boundaries of human decency. It is a tale of betrayal so profound it defies language. It is a story of brutality born in the darkness of a basement, and a chilling detachment that makes one wonder if the person standing before us truly shares our humanity. This was not just a crime, members of the jury. It was a scorched earth assault on everything we hold sacred: life, dignity, and the very sanctity of the human form. As we lay out the evidence, piece by gruesome, methodical piece, I ask you to remember one thing. Your verdict is not merely a legal filing. It is a moral declaration. It is a statement to the world that evil, no matter how it smirks, no matter how it laughs in the face of consequence, will ultimately bow before the law. The defense may speak of shadows and sickness, but we shall speak of the light of truth. Let us begin the presentation of the state's evidence. Members of the jury, I want you to close your eyes and picture a quiet morning in Green Bay, Wisconsin. It is February 23rd, 2022. The air is biting, the kind of Wisconsin winter that settles into the bones. On Stony Brook Lane, life should have been routine. Coffee brewing, the sound of the morning news, the mundane rhythm of a suburban home. But inside one house, the silence was different. It was heavy. It was wrong. Tara Pekanik, a mother who loved her son, walked down the stairs into her basement. Think of that walk. Think of the mundane nature of a mother checking on her child. She expected to find her 24-year-old son, Shad Therian, perhaps sleeping off a long night. Shad was a young man who lived with a kindness that his friends still talk about today. He was a son, a brother, a grandson. He worked in the family business alongside his father and grandfather. He loved the outdoors, the crackle of a campfire, the simple joy of a video game. He had a future. He had a seat at the dinner table that would never be filled again. When Tara reached that basement, she saw a bucket. It was covered with a simple towel, a domestic object used to hide a demonic reality. When she lifted that towel, the world as she knew it ended. There, staring back at her from the plastic depths of that bucket, was the severed head of her son. Can you imagine that scream, members of the jury? The sound of a mother's heart breaking in real time? But the horror, as the evidence will show, was only just beginning. When the investigators arrived, they didn't find a crime scene. They found a butcher shop. This was a tableau of unimaginable gruesomeness that left even seasoned detectives reeling. Shad's body had not just been killed, It had been dismantled. His torso was found in one area. His limbs were tucked away in bags and totes. His organs, the very engines of his life, had been removed and scattered. His genitals had been severed. Look at the evidence of the knives recovered from the scene. They weren't weapons of war. They were kitchen tools, used for hours in a methodical, cold-blooded effort to erase the humanity of Shad Therian. This wasn't a crime of sudden heat. This was a slow, agonizing desecration. Blood stained the floors, but the prosecution will show you that the defendant actually took the time to try and drain the body, to clean, to organize the remains in boxes and a vehicle as if she were packing for a move. And who was the architect of this nightmare? Taylor Denise Shabiznes, 25 years old, a woman who had been in a relationship with Shad. When the police found her, she wasn't hiding in a hole or trembling in fear. She was found with blood still staining her clothing, her sweatshirt a canvas of Shad's life force. Her demeanor? It was the first piece of evidence of her true nature. She was detached. She was almost amused. Members of the jury, I direct your attention to the interrogation room. The evidence here is not a physical object, but a voice. A voice that should have been filled with the weight of what had transpired, but instead, it crackled with a chilling, casual indifference. The jury heard a voice on the line of history that day that revealed the abyss. When the detectives sat across from Taylor Shabiznes, they saw a woman who looked like anyone you might pass on the street. But as she began to speak, the mask didn't just slip, she threw it away. She described the moments of Shad's death with the clinical detail of a grocery list. She spoke of his face turning purple. She spoke of the froth emanating from his mouth as the life was choked out of him by a chain. And then, she spoke of what happened next. She admitted to engaging in sexual acts with his lifeless body. She told investigators, with a straight face, how she used sex toys on a corpse, even placing one in his mouth. Members of the jury, let that sink into your moral consciousness. The man she claimed to care for was dead by her hand, and her response was to violate his dignity further. And then came the laughter. In the middle of describing how she carved him up, she laughed. She taunted the detectives. She looked at these men, whose job it is to protect the public, and told them, and I quote, "You're going to have fun trying to find all the organs." She spoke of getting lazy while dismembering him, explaining why she left a leg or a foot behind in the van. To her, the disposal of a human being was a chore that she simply grew tired of completing. What drives a person to this? The defense will point to her history, bipolar disorder, psychosis, a heavy veil of methamphetamine use. And yes, drugs are a plague, but look at the intent. Look at the clarity with which she recounted her actions. This was not a woman lost in a blur. This was a woman reveling in the chaos she had birthed. She treated the interrogation like a game of cat and mouse, mocking the gravity of the law. She wasn't a victim of her mind. She was a master of her malice. As the wheels of justice began to turn, the world watched in horror as the defendant turned the courtroom into a stage. If you ever doubted the darker side, mentioned in our opening, you need only look at her behavior during the pretrial hearings. Taylor Shabiznes did not walk into court with a bowed head. She walked in with a smirk. She smiled directly at the news cameras, basking in the infamy. At one point, in a display of pure arrogance, she made a gunfinger motion toward the judge, a silent, symbolic threat to the very institution of justice. But her defiance turned physical. Imagine the scene, members of the jury, a quiet courtroom, a lawyer doing his job, and suddenly, like a predator, the defendant lunges. She attacked her own defense attorney, Mr. Quinn. She didn't just push him. She threw her entire weight into the assault, forcing sheriff's deputies to wrestle her to the carpet. The courtroom had to be cleared. The proceedings were halted. Was this insanity? Or was it the ultimate act of control? She wanted to be the center of the universe. She wanted to prove that she was the one in charge, not the judge, not the law, and certainly not the victim's family sitting in the pews. For months, the legal system bent over backwards to ensure her rights. Evaluations were performed. Doctors poked and prodded her psyche. They debated her competency. But ultimately, the court found what we knew all along. She was fit. She knew exactly what she was doing. Her antics were a performance, a calculated attempt to manipulate the system and perhaps pave the way for a claim of insanity that the law simply would not support. July 2023. The heat of summer matched the intensity of the trial. The prosecution laid out the timeline with surgical precision. It began with drugs. Methamphetamine, the chemical catalyst for so many tragedies. Chad and Taylor were in that basement, using together. What began as a consensual encounter turned into a descent into the pit. She used a chain. She admitted she liked the feeling of it tightening. She watched as he struggled. She watched as his heart slowed and eventually stopped. And then, the hours of darkness followed. She didn't call for help. She didn't panic. She went to work. She used kitchen knives to separate his head from his shoulders. She opened his chest. She spent the better part of a day in a drug-fueled, yet methodically executed, dismemberment. She even admitted to showering with the blood. When her interrogation tapes were played in court, the room went cold. The jury heard her own voice admitting she liked the strangulation. They saw the photos, the head in the bucket, the bags of remains. The defense tried to argue that her mental state made her unable to form intent, but the evidence of her cleaning the scene suggested a woman who knew exactly how wrong her actions were. On July 26, 2023, the jury returned. The tension was thick enough to choke. As the foreman read the words, "Guilty of first-degree intentional homicide, guilty of mutilating a corpse, guilty of third-degree sexual assault," something incredible happened. The smirk died. For the first time in over a year, Taylor's business looked small. The laughter stopped. The gun fingers were gone. When the judge polled each juror and 12 voices said yes, the illusion of her power shattered into 1,000 pieces. But every monster has a beginning, doesn't she? At the sentencing hearing, we saw a glimpse of the wreckage that preceded the crime. Arturo Coronado, Taylor's father, was brought into the court. He didn't come in a suit. He came in the orange jumpsuit of an inmate, shackled just like his daughter. It was a tragic image of a legacy of incarceration. He wept as he spoke of a daughter who had not always been this way. He blamed the world. He blamed her ex-husband, calling him a loser who dragged her back into the abyss of meth. He spoke of trying to get her help, of a system that let her go when she should have been held. He asked for mercy. He asked for a chance at parole, a light at the end of a very long tunnel. But then, the voices of the Therian family rose to meet him. Uncles spoke of the cowardice of her actions. A father spoke of a forgiveness that seemed almost superhuman, yet he demanded justice. They spoke of the Shad that the world lost, not the exhibit on a screen, but the boy who loved camping and his family. The judge looked at Taylor. He looked at the woman who had mocked his courtroom, who had attacked her counsel, and who had butchered a human being. He called her actions incomprehensible. He called her behavior appalling. And then he lowered the hammer. Life without the possibility of parole. She will never feel the sun on her face outside of a prison yard. She will never have a kitchen knife in her hand again. She will grow old and die within the gray stone of a Wisconsin penitentiary. The performance was finally, truly over. Members of the jury, our journey through this darkness has reached its end. But as you leave this courtroom of the mind, I ask you to carry the weight of what we've discussed. The case of Taylor Schabusiness is a mirror held up to the darkest corners of our society. It forces us to ask, where does mental illness end and pure evil begin? How can a soul become so detached that it views the desecration of a human body as a chore that one might get lazy about? We see the intersection of drugs, broken systems, and the ultimate, terrifying power of human choice. Taylor Schabusiness chose to tighten that chain. She chose to pick up those knives. And she chose to laugh while she told the story. But the law stood firm. Our society, through the hands of 12 ordinary citizens, said no. We said that Shad Therian's life had value. We said that his body was sacred. We proved that while evil may laugh in the short term, it eventually finds itself silenced by the steady, heavy hand of justice. Justice has spoken. It has wiped the smirk away. It has provided a cage for the monster. As we step back into the light of the world, let us remember that morality and law are the only things standing between us and the abyss. Protect the vulnerable. Demand the truth. And never forget, even when the world seems silent, justice is always speaking. The state rests.